What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about how getting rid of our old wedge monitor systems and switching to in-ear monitor systems instead can really help us and our team take a huge step forward. The problem is many of us struggle to get in-ear mixers that we're happy with. And so today we're going to talk about the top 5 reasons that folks struggle to get an in-ear monitor mix that they're happy with. All right, so let's jump into the first and probably most common reason that people can't get a mix that they're happy with when it comes to their in-ears, and that is mixing without context. What I mean by this is that oftentimes what we do is we mix our in-ears where it's like 90% us, 10% everyone else, every other instrument that's happening on stage. And when we do this, it's creating this incredibly isolated environment where all we can really hear is ourselves. In our own defense, typically the reason we do this is because we're thinking we need to be able to fix any sort of pitch problems or dynamic issues. And so we do that with the best intentions, but I think ultimately it really hurts our overall mix. The way that I want to encourage you to try to tackle this is to begin mixing your in-ears like you're the person mixing for the whole room. And what I mean by that is start to mix to where everything has its place in your in-ear monitor mix. You can identify every instrument and every vocal. Then take your instrument or vocal and poke it up above everything else just a little bit so that you can identify the parts that you're supposed to be hitting and playing. If you try this, I promise you what you'll find is that there's an energy that's created by that and a glue that brings you and your team back together in a way that you can work together to try and lead the room in worship. The next mistake that I want to talk about that I see teams making all the time is that they either have settled for a mono in-ear setup or they aren't using panning when they have access to a stereo monitor setup. If you don't know what I mean when I say panning, panning is simply accessing the stereo image that's created by the fact that we have 2 ears. We hear in stereo. And so when we have access to a stereo setup, we can actually move things to the left and right within our mix. So let's talk about how to fix this. If you're stuck with a mono setup, I'm going to assume that it's possibly because you opted to go with a wireless setup instead of a wired setup. And this happens a lot because it's a lot cheaper to go mono with a wireless setup than it is to go with a stereo wireless setup. If that's you, I want to strongly encourage you to consider go back to the wire. Go back to using a headphone extension cable instead of a wireless pack. And I know that that sounds tough, but I promise you that having access to that stereo field will give you way more than any wireless pack could ever give you. Trust me, I understand the benefits of being wireless, and I think that's a great way to go if you can afford to go that way while maintaining the ability to be stereo. But I would encourage you prioritize stereo setups over wireless. But if you have access to a stereo setup right now and aren't using panning, you have to start. Try taking things and moving them to the left and right within your mix. This is done differently depending on what system you have, but essentially a good example would be if there's 2 electric guitars on stage, try hard panning them, which means one goes 100% to the right side and the other one goes 100% to the left side. Even if there's an acoustic guitar and an electric guitar, one of each, try taking the acoustic guitar and putting it like 30 or 40% on the left side and the electric guitar 30 or 40% on the right side. If you have drum overhead mics and there's 2 of them, hard pan them. If you've got multiple vocalists, drop them in different places throughout the stereo field. What happens when we begin doing this is that by moving things out, instead of all coming straight down that center mono path, is that we begin to be able to identify instruments and voices within their own place in the stereo field. And this gives us the ability to kind of zoom out and hear things from a perspective that we hadn't before. What you'll find when you do this as well is that you typically don't have to turn up something in order to hear it as much as you would have when it was in mono. And that's just because it has its own place in the mix. The next mistake that I want to talk about is a mistake that once addressed probably has the most potential to have a radical impact on the way that your in-ears sound every week. The mistake that I'm talking about here is not using ambient mics. Ambient microphones are simply either one or a pair of either shotgun or large diaphragm condenser microphones that go somewhere in your room. Typically, they're found at like the edge of the stage, the edge of the sound booth, or even hanging from the ceiling. And the purpose of them is to give you back what in-ears take, and that's the feel and sound of a room. See, what happens when we use in-ears is that essentially what we're doing is taking an earplug that has a speaker or a driver in it, and we're jamming it into our ear canal. And what that does is it isolates us from the rest of the room, just like an earplug does. And the problem with that is that our brains are used to hearing the ambient noise that's created by a source in a room, whether that source is a voice or a drum kit or a guitar amp or whatever. See, we don't lean down to the drum kit, the snare drum or the kick drum with our ears 6 inches away so that we can hear it properly. No, we're used to hearing a drum kit within the context of a room and how it sounds in a room. So using ambient microphones within the context of how we mix our in-ears gives us back that life that's taken from isolating ourselves from the room. So if you don't hear anything else I've said today, you have to at least experiment with using ambient mics in your mix this week. Sorry, I kind of feel like I'm fussing at you. Anyway, moving on. The next mistake I want to talk about, and this is a big one, is A, having an in-ear that's not quality enough for the purpose that we need them for, or B, having a really bad fitting in-ear monitor. And trust me, I understand if you're saying, I can't afford a really quality in-ear monitor. I definitely can't afford to pay to have a molded custom set of in-ear monitors made for myself. And I get that. I do want to say that there are companies making some really, really quality in-ears for not a lot of money. I'll link some in the description below, but some good examples of this is like the Shure SC215s. Those are $99 brand new. They're 2-driver, so there's 2 drivers for each in-ear, and they sound so good for the money. I think this is another good opportunity to talk about priorities when it comes to setting up our in-ear systems. For whatever reason, in our world, wireless is king. So oftentimes, teams will sacrifice these 2 major things, that's earbud quality and stereo, to get wireless. Let me encourage you, if you have a limited budget to set up an in-ear rig, wireless should be the last thing on your list in order of priorities. So in the context of this point, the mistake we're talking about right now, try and get the best quality earbud you can with what money you have. Okay, so the other side of this is maybe you have a good quality earbud, it's just that it doesn't fit very well. And this is a huge deal. The reason it's such a big deal is because in-ear monitors, in order to be able to transmit the frequencies that our ears are used to hearing, have to create a seal within our ear canal. When they don't create a seal, a lot of the frequencies that we like, that we want to hear, leak out of the sides of that in-ear monitor. And this is detrimental to your mix. This means all you're going to hear is a nasally, snarly, weird sounding mix, and then you're going to get little bits and pieces of the ambience of the room outside of the context of the room itself. This is easy enough to fix because most in-ears actually come with multiple size of foamies or buds in the box. So I just encourage you to experiment with those different sizes and find one that creates a good, comfortable seal in your ear. Believe it or not, there's actually some pretty cool DIY in-ear monitor molds that you can do yourself using off-the-shelf earbuds. So I'll link some of those videos below. The last mistake that I want to talk about today is a big one, and that is being afraid to ask for help. Oftentimes, folks will stand in front of their mixer and they'll end up with a terrible, really unsatisfying, really distracting in-ear monitor mix, and they'll never communicate it. Or maybe even worse, they'll only communicate it at the end of the day when all the services are over with. And I want to add to that I think it can be incredibly helpful when we're descriptive and we give lots of detail about what we aren't getting out of our mix that we expect. And so it's not just about saying something, it's about saying something that's helpful. So I just want to encourage you, don't be afraid to ask for help. And as you ask for help, try and be really descriptive about the kind of things that you expect out of your in-ear mix. Quick tip on this, if you're a worship leader or a technical director at your church, what I like to do is when I have a frustrated volunteer that's saying, I'm really struggling to get a mix that I'm happy with, first of all is thank them thank them for communicating that they can't get what they want out of their in-ear mix. And then I'll typically put my instrument down, walk over to their station, unplug their ears and plug my in-ear monitors into their setup so that I can hear what they're hearing. Oftentimes I'll even ask them to sing or play or whatever it is that they're doing that day. And then I'll adjust their mix, explaining as I go why I'm making the changes that I am. Give them their cable back, let them hear it, and then typically what we get is a really helpful little lesson out of that moment. So worship leaders, technical directors, I want you to be proactive with this. Go after your volunteers, asking them, hey, are you happy with your in-ear mix? Are you satisfied with the things that you're getting? Is there anything I can do to help you dial in an in-ear mix that you're happy with? All right, so as we wrap this thing up, I did want to point out that at least some of you are probably thinking, that's great, but we can't afford an in-ear system. Well, I think that in-ear monitors are more accessible now than they've ever been in the past. And if you can afford the wedge monitors that you're probably using now, you can probably afford some level of in-ear monitor setup. And I think that to start consider taking that step would be a great way to help your team take a big step forward. I've got some future content coming where we talk about wireless setups at multiple price points. And trust me, it's really accessible. It can be really time-saving and really budget-friendly as you start to look at building a system for your church. So hit that subscribe button if you aren't subscribed already. If you liked today's content, a thumbs up would be appreciated. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or want to talk any more about in-ear monitor systems, drop a comment in the comment section below. Otherwise, there will be links in the description for all the stuff that we've talked about in today's video, and I will see you guys in the next video.